Hi again. We're in John Wesley Bready, This Freedom Whence, in the chapter Politics, Penal Code, and Prisons. In the last segment, Bready dealt with the beginnings of reform under John Wesley's early ministry, and Dr. Dagg, who was the reforming keeper of the prison of Newgate in London. Now John Howard, who is the name most associated with prison reform in Great Britain. When Howard, in 1773, began his historic crusade, prison conditions, though somewhat improved since Oglethorpe's day, were extremely nauseous. Most jailers received no pay. Like trading justices, they were jobbers, hence being dependent for livelihood upon bribes, tips, fees, and extortions. Their tactics were intrigue and cunning. Profits on the open sale of vile intoxicants and on the covert permission of prostitution, together with weekly charges for release from chains, were among their chief sources of revenue. Many persons were confined in jails for months, even years, awaiting the assize, and many were detained after being pronounced innocent because they could not pay the accumulated jailer's bill. Notorious prisoners, too, like Jack Sheppard and Reverend Dr. Dodd, were still exhibited to the public, usually at a shilling a head. Sheppard, in this way, brought in £200. On the revelations of Howard's selfless career, we dare not pause. One or two quotations will suggest the problem he faced. At Ely, the prison being unsafe, the jailer had endeavored to secure the inmates by chaining them down on their backs upon the floor, placing an iron collar with spikes about their necks and a heavy iron bar over their legs. Thetford jail was a small dungeon down a ladder of 10 steps with a small window, yet in this pit at the summer assizes, from 16 to 20 persons were usually confined for several days and nights without regard to age, sex, or circumstances. Of Knaresborough jail in 1776, Howard says, "It is under a hall of difficult access, the door about 4 feet from the ground, only one room about 12 feet square, earth floor, no fireplace, very offensive, a common sewer from the town running through it, uncovered. An officer confined there took with him a dog to defend him from vermin, but the dog was soon destroyed, and the prisoner's face much disfigured by them." End of quote. Jail fever, too, was one of the byproducts of the filth and stench of most prisons of the time. In May 1750, 2 judges, the Lord Mayor of London, several of the jury, and 60 persons who were present at the session house during the trial died of jail fever, contracted from a batch of filthy prisoners who, before entering the dock, had been subjected to long and heinous confinement. A study of the 18th century prison exhibits in the London Museum will reveal something of the gruesome bestiality from which our modern prison system has been redeemed. The recent researches, too, of Dr. George, Professor Halevi, and other scholars have proven conclusively that the earlier half of that century in England, particularly from 1720 to 1750, was a period of social retrogression without parallel in modern times. Yet in 1752, David Hume, the materialistic philosopher and intellectual monarch of the time, was blandly asserting, quote, that the privileges of the people have, during the past 2 centuries, been continually upon the increase, end of quote. Had Hume descended from the Olympian heights of his own frigid superiority and come to know the life of the common people of England, he would have realized that the privileges of the people, far from increasing, had for decades been declining. And had he the spiritual eyes to see, he would have realized also that the soulless skepticism of which he was chief propagator was a primary instrument of that retrogression. Gray, the poet, said of Hume, quote, that he has continued all his days an infant, but one that has unhappily been taught to read and write, end of quote. Is not this criticism equally applicable to the combination of intellectual sophistication and spiritual atrophy which characterized the ruling cliques of most of the century? Next time, a poignant paradox.